Good morning and welcome to the Grand Rapids Community College Board of Trustees meeting Thursday, June 11, 2020. The purpose of our meeting this morning is to take yet another look at staff's best thinking on budget recommendations, a recommendation that we will deal with in a formal way at our next meeting on Monday. Because this is a formal board meeting, we do give opportunity for public comment. And for those of you out there watching this on YouTube, you've got opportunity to do that if you wish to do that. If you're inclined to make comment, please use your chat function on your screen, identify yourself. And what will happen is that comment will funnel its way to me, and throughout our presentation, if you have a question, we will try to deal with the questions at that time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to President Pink and or Lisa to begin to walk us through your best thinking as we move towards budget approval on next Monday.
Thank you, Chairperson Cucci, and good morning, Board of Trustees, and good morning to anyone else out there joining us this morning. As we have been so concerned and observing of what our present situation is, not just here at the college, but also what we are seeing and hearing at the state level in terms of our state appropriation. We are grateful that you are wanting to have this conversation just so we can make sure we are giving you as much information as possible and as real time as possible leading up to what we will plan to present to you on Monday as our final submission to you on the next year's budget. And so what we've done today is prepared some information for you, letting you know what we are seeing now. Just as recent as this week, in the last day or two, having some conversations with folks who are at the state level in terms of working with the legislature and trying to get some guidance there. We'll have a little information for you on that this morning as well. So I will hand it over to our CFO, Lisa Freiburger, and I will say before I do that, tell her and tell you, just letting you know how grateful I am to her and her team as we continue to dig into this. It's interesting when you dig into something that once you get one layer gone, you see another layer that you're going, what in the world is that? But her and her team are doing an incredible job, in my opinion, of how we try to navigate these unpredictable times. So Lisa, please share with our board this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Pink, and good morning to all. We do have a brief PowerPoint presentation to walk you through our current thinking around the upcoming 2021 fiscal year and related budget. This is all focused on general fund, although I will provide you some brief updates on our auxiliary funds, as well as there has been some impact, as you can imagine, there. The COVID
Lisa,
situation.
can I interrupt just for a second
Yep.
here? I know that we're all muted, but let's feel free. This is intended to be a conversation, not a presentation. So anyone, just feel free. And it's a little clumsy because you just start talking, but feel free to do that. Making sure that you don't have to wait until the end of this presentation for your questions. Okay, So trustees, feel free just to engage in conversation. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize. I should have said that up front, but we'll go through this fairly slowly. And absolutely, if you have any questions, please let me know and we will do our best to address them. As I mentioned, this is focused primarily on general fund and provides a bit of an update since we have met last time. Although I will share with you, as President Pink alluded, we have been in almost constant communication with folks that are monitoring very closely, as are we, what's going on in Lansing, both with this fiscal year and next. And we do not have any additional specific information around our state revenue picture, really, than we did last time we spoke. So with that, we will start out with an update on 1920. And the first bullet there that says a state aid reduction of 15% anticipated for 1920. We don't have any information on that yet. I had really thought that by this time we might have some additional inkling on what this fiscal year from the state might look like. Certainly the state has a very significant budget deficit, which they are required to fix. There have been some significant conversation earlier about an executive order coming from the governor to balance the 1920 state fiscal year with a negative supplemental, if you will, or a reduction in revenue, both community colleges and other revenue pass-throughs from the state, kind of across the board. We have not seen that yet. It is now June 11th, and based on that, I am beginning to believe that they might try to fix 1920 in a different way, whether that is using reserves at the state level, potentially some flexibility with federal stimulus dollars. Again, we have no specific information. Had anticipated that we might by now. It is still possible that we will get some sort of executive order cut for our 1920 year. But we're getting pretty close to not having a lot of time left to deal with that. So we'll continue to monitor very closely, are ready for that if it comes. But what I'm beginning to believe is that they might just try to balance this year and push those cuts to next year, being 2021. It is important to remember that our state aid payments are spread over 11 equal payments, more or less. So we still have a June state aid payment to receive and a July and August payment. And the July and August payments are related to 1920, despite the fact that they come after our fiscal year. So we record those or accrue them in accounting speak back to this current fiscal year. So it is still possible that the state could make reductions in July and August payments. It's the best information we have now. We are still potentially planning, but have not heard anything. Despite that, we are still looking, as we spoke last time, at a fairly significant additional unrealized gain in our investments, primarily because of the longer term governmental holdings that we have that are, because they were purchased prior to all of the adjustment in our market, running some comparatively higher interest rates, which will result in some unrealized gains that we'll have to record as of June 30. We are also looking at, within our current year, some additional expense reductions or underspending, if you will. Specifically in our student and contingency staffing, we don't have hardly any students and contingency staff working now, primarily because we still don't have many staff working on campus. Thus, we're going to have savings in those budgets beyond what we typically see. We are also going to have savings in budget line items beyond what we typically see in some of the areas like professional development, travel, and other non-salary areas, specifically related to the fact that our campus itself has been closed. Travel has been virtually non-existent since March. So we are anticipating some higher positive budget variances in those lines because of that specific situation. If you couple that with the fact that the budget that you have approved, including the mid-year budget adjustments you approved back in February, has us from a budget standpoint, before any of this, closing with a positive approximately $1.276 million. I am still very much anticipating that we will close this year, 1920, with a positive budget variance. Any questions on 1920 before I move us? Hearing none, class, I think you can move us forward. Thank you. Still wanted to at least mention the federal stimulus funding, or the CARES Act. We talked a bit about this last time. We did receive or haven't drawn it down, but have been awarded a $6.8 million CARES Act funding allocation. Half of that is going directly to students in the forms of grants. Much of that has been distributed to students already, and we will continue to work through that process. Our student Services Student Affairs team is working on that and will continue to do so throughout the summer and most likely into the fall. There is a $3.4 million allocation to offset institutional budget related impacts. And we are planning to use that to offset revenue reductions, primarily around fee waivers and credit retakes that we've offered students, both to help them specifically with courses that were moved very rapidly to an online format in March, and then fee waivers across the board in the summer, and then potentially what we might be looking at related to online fees in fall and winter. So that primarily will be how that institutional $3.4 million is spent, again, to help offset revenue reductions that the college itself is experiencing. That funding.
Lisa, this is Kathleen, and I have a
years.
This is Kathleen. I have a question about the CARES Act. Will every student who needs the stimulus payments, I think it's a $500 per student payment, will they receive it, or will there be any students who, will it run out before everybody gets their allocation? The students.
We have provided for allocation for every eligible student. The federal government did put some eligibility criteria on that. But every eligible student that has been identified by our student affairs team and financial aid team has been awarded, if you will, the $500. The students did have to request the funding. And we actually had a few students, and I know President Pink might have more his head about this, but we've had a few students that have actually said, then that's okay, I don't need it. And then had other students, I believe, that weren't in the original allocation, but have then since come forward and said, I am eligible, and we're working through that as well. Intentionally, not the entire allocation wasn't pushed out in the first wave, so to speak, so that we could handle that. But yes, to answer your question, every eligible student will receive that. We will not run out of that funding based on what we know now. Clearly the $3.4 million is a cap, but we have a plan for that appropriately.
Yes.
Okay.
As Lisa said, Trustee Brunsma, there are some of those students, and I saw some notes from some of our students that said, you know what, I'm okay. I don't want to accept that funding. We have, as Lisa said, and wanted to just reiterate, there are some of those dollars that from our financial aid consultant advised us, some of it keep back of the student funding, so that as more students that we find come forward, that we will have funds to still be able to distribute. And we made actually a second wave of ask of students who we hadn't heard from or who had not really said anything to us. We did that a couple of weeks ago, as I understand, and that second wave actually produced more students that said, yes, it would be helpful to me. And so that figure has already gone over $1 million, as I remember last I saw. So those dollars are already flowing out the door.
Okay, thank you.
Lisa, apropos of that, does the recipient of the $500, does that impinge at all on their student aid or foundation grant?
It does not specifically, although in order to receive the $500, you had to be FAFSA, you had to have completed a FAFSA form. So again, there are some restrictions to that, but it is not reduced based on any other federal or scholarship aid that you may have received to help cover tuition or other expenses for the winter term.
Thank you.
Wanted to share this information both to give you an update on where we are with CARES Act funding, but also to specifically point out, because this funding will cross fiscal years and we are working very actively on it now, it will also, in relative to the amount going out to students, really kind of be a federal revenue and then an equal amount out to students. With the institutional, it will be a revenue replacement based on what we've lost. Those dollars are not at this point in time built into our budget. Neither are the revenue losses to the extent of federal revenue recovery. So at least wanted to point that out. We will cross fiscal years. We will keep you updated on how these dollars are being allocated and spent, and ultimately the amount that spills over into 2021 will be recognized in that fiscal year, and anything in 1920 will be included in our annual audit report to you as both federal revenue and related expense.
So just to clarify, this is Kathleen again, the 3.4 CARES Act institutional dollars, 3.4 million is not included in our 2021 packet that we have.
That is correct, because
Okay.
and I'll give you a specific example of the rationale behind that. We have waived all student fees for summer. Summer crosses our fiscal year, 1920 and 2021. So we'll have some of that in both years. We won't have the fee revenue, which in 1920 and 2021 right now is budgeted, but we will have a federal replacement revenue. So the impact will be the same. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Absolutely. So if there are no other questions on this class, we can move on to the next slide. So now moving on to 2021, and there are some changes here that I'll point out from where we were last time.
Lisa, can I just ask a overall question?
Sure.
So as we look at the budget and we think about the budget, and I'm particularly dealing with some of our direct and indirect positions, because the campus is closed, do we have any idea what percentage of our employees are laid off? I'm assuming that you get food staff and custodial staff and even maybe the police or some other positions aren't working, whereas a teacher can have an online class. Do we have an idea of what percentage of our staff, when campus is closed, can't work, and in what percentage, if any, of those people are actually laid off 100%?
I can share with you that our facilities team and our campus police teams are actually back on campus and have been for since the middle of May. They are readying our campus for a general, very slow reopening, and have been working.
Okay.
We have very limited other staff on campus right now. And as we have our very specific phased reopening plan, that will continue to grow. We will have some very specific and small groups of students back on campus within the next several weeks. So again, that number will continue to grow. We have done very few layoffs, if you will, to answer your specific question. And then they have been very targeted and very specific to those small number of staff that aren't able to work when we are not fully open. A good example of that might be our early childhood center, where we haven't reopened that yet. So we have some staff that are impacted there.
So when I think of, for example, I think of furloughs, that's going to be salaried individuals. But if hourly employees, and you said, so there's no layoffs, I'm assuming we have some salary people being employed, but hourly employees typically don't get paid if they're not working. So how are we treating those differently?
Right now, some of our hourly part-time employees, what we would refer to as our contingency employees, have been, I don't want to call it laid off, because they are all employed to varying hours, but you're right, they are not being paid. We have very few contingency employees that are still working in very specific instances. And of course, we are continuing with those, but by and large, our contingent employee or part-time hourly employee force are not being paid now. Many of them that were eligible might be seeking unemployment benefits, but they are not being paid. Our hourly employees, like custodians that are full-time benefited hourly employees, are by and large back at work. We have our clerical or APSS employee group, our more clerical team, support professional team, and they are by and large working remotely, but they do have work that they can do remotely. That work may vary on a case-by-case basis, but they are working and being paid. Did that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. Earlier, you talked about just the variability, and that just goes to demonstrate where the variability is. So thank you.
I will also add to that, Trustee Brame, some things as far as Lisa mentioned. So facilities has been back on campus primarily because we are starting in on our phase-in plan of returning people to campus. That phase-in plan is a 5 phases to that plan. On Monday, we'll enter what will truly be kind of a phase 1, get into phase 2. Because phase 2 actually will involve some students being back on campus. We'll start having some of those students actually more so probably the following week. But facilities has already been here because what we felt like was that we needed to get them back on campus at a time where they could go through and start doing some cleaning, and for 2 reasons. One, we hadn't had buildings truly occupied for a couple of months. And so, you know, when you come back into a building after a couple of months, there's some cleaning you need to do. And so we've been in on that, but also our facilities team has come up with specific protocols around cleaning in terms of what we're in right now with COVID-19. And so getting into those kind of protocols is helpful and has been helpful. And I was happy to bring them back. And then you mentioned police. Our campus police has been back on campus for a couple of weeks as well. And we were very grateful for that, especially if you think about a week and a half ago with what happened here in the downtown. Our campus police was on campus that night, just in a way of, and we had several of our policemen on campus that night to just oversee our facility and oversee what's going on here. And so it's been good. Our timing on that has been great in terms of both facilities and campus police. But those would have been some of the groups, I believe, as you mentioned, that you would wonder about as in a state that we've been of shutdown and working virtually. We're starting that gradual, and I would say gradual, I can't express that enough, our gradual having people return to campus coming this Monday and starting in on our phase-in plan.
So currently, I think we're in phase 4 in the state of Michigan. So you mentioned all the protocols, and you're right. I think it's a great idea to have your staff in there getting the campus ready, and particularly cleaning. Is the college required to do some of the things that we in manufacturing are required to do? For example, testing all employees, auditing them to make sure that they've met the conditions according to the governor's executive order. And I'm just wondering, how do you manage that with so many students as you begin to slowly open up?
Yeah, we'll let you know. So once they return, because what we've done is that we have initiated and put together what's called our COVID response team. That is made up of faculty and staff from across campus to start digging in on this. And the protocol you mentioned, Trustee Brame, is coming as far as what we see here locally, not just from CDC and Kent County Health Department advisement, but also with, as you're saying, some of our local companies of protocols. And so already we have a 5-question survey that students and faculty and staff right now, that's all on campus, need to respond to prior to coming to campus. And those are probably very similar, if not identical, to many of the questions that a lot of our companies are asking. If there's a no to any of those answers, though, that typically goes to our HR office that then handles and works with that employee. Once we have students on campus, our student services, student affairs office will handle those responses. All that is done electronically. So students or faculty and staff will go to the online center, and that questionnaire is in there. If there's a no there, then it'll kick it to our IT people have set that up, done some really good work in setting that up. So yes, we have those similar protocols, aside from all the PPE that we have with distancing, with masks, with shields in places that we continue to work on. So yeah, a lot of the protocols that I'm sure you'd see at Cascade Engineering, very similar in cases of what we're doing. Lisa, anything?
Thank you. Good answer. Appreciate it.
I actually have a follow-up on that. This is Kathleen. Are you doing the screening every day for students and employees, or is it just?
Every day.
It
Okay,
is daily.
Every day.
great.
Lisa, this is Kathy Crosby. I have a follow-up question on the CARES Act dollars, because when I looked through the budget, I was looking for where it might appear. And if I understood you correctly, the reason I don't see it either as a restricted fund or anything else is because you're using it to, as you said, with the fees, replace those dollars that you're not collecting. So that kind of implies to me that there are specific line items in our budget that the CARES Act funding could be used to sort of fill in for, replace. But I'm wondering if it doesn't require some footnotes, something on the budget itself that reflects the availability of those dollars or even their existence. Going through the documents sent to us, it isn't clear how those dollars can or will be used. So how are we handling that from the public point of view?
So certainly as we continue to flesh out how those dollars will be used and in which fiscal year, because again, they're going to cross with my example
Right.
of summer fee waiver. Some of those will replace fees that we were expecting to collect this fiscal year. Clearly they will all be recorded, absolutely. With all of this, with the CARES Act, with any additional federal supplemental funding that may be coming in this conversation of a second wave of stimulus funding potentially, as well as the significant variability you'll see in a second we're continuing to look at with state aid and with enrollment even. It would be our intention sitting here now to bring you as a board, most likely a full budget amendment as early as September or October, to be able to lay all of that out for you, give you a complete adjustment of what we have with where our state aid is, where our enrollment and that tuition revenue is, and where the CARES Act funding is. So we will absolutely continue to share with you how we're using that and where it will go. But would anticipate, because of that variability as well as significant other revenue variability, that we're going to need to bring you a budget amendment significantly earlier than we would typically do in February, most likely in October.
I think I just want to voice the concern that because the news has picked up on accounting already for where some of those dollars are going, that we can't be too soon or too transparent with the public and how we're using the dollars we got. And I know we'll get a full accounting of it, but just acknowledging in the budget that we have these dollars and how we're using them might be part of the presentation that we want to give the public.
Yep, and we absolutely can. As I mentioned, and we'll continue to share it, and we can include it in our restricted fund if you'd like to see an estimate of that revenue stream there. It would be in there, our grant, our restricted fund, with an equal and offsetting expenditure. But we can certainly do that with an estimate if you'd like to see it there. We could also footnote it to know that it's coming.
I think the footnote is adequate, Lisa. I don't want to do overkill. I simply am a little, maybe there'll be somebody in the audience wondering if we're even going to mention it.
Yep, no, absolutely. And we can do that and provide you with some sort of summary footnote for Monday so that you can see where we are with that. Absolutely.
That would be a nice improvement. Oh, thanks.
I think also I'll add that part of we just like all other many other institutions that I'm familiar with across the country and the state, we too are in that same boat of trying to make sure that we know what is actually allowed in terms of how we could use those stimulus dollars. As I'm sure you've been seeing, there's been guidance, and then a different set of guidance, and then another set of guidance has come down from the federal government, from the Department of Ed. In some cases, some schools had taken the guidance and started spending it as they thought so, and then the additional guidance that came out said, no, you weren't supposed to spend it that way. So we are trying, and I think from what I've seen and how we've been working even with our auditors to make sure that we are seeing it right and making sure we know what we can spend it on and how we can go about that. That's been our focus on just trying to make sure we're doing it right. And once we do that, Trustee Crosby, of course, we want to be as transparent with our public as possible, and we'll do so in saying, here's how that looks.
Bill, I have actually a question about changed guidance. Did the changed guidance from the Department of Ed on the half of the CARES Act for students, did the change in guidance expand eligibility or tighten eligibility for students?
The latest, or what came out last time, and Trustee Brunsma, the two of us had a little communication about it. Really what it did was put some things in place so that the Department of Ed could actually do what they were wanting to do. So it didn't really add or take away anything. It just gave them some allowances to be able to say, if we're going to, in handing it out to X students, it just gave some almost legal precedent for being able to say that. So when our financial aid consultant and when our people looked at that, their message back to me was, really, it's not going to change. It didn't change who was eligible. It just helped the department in terms of what they were saying. And I will say, I probably misspoke. I think it hasn't been, I guess I would probably say what we have seen is additional guidance rather than changed guidance that we have seen over the course of the last several months from the Department of Ed. But that additional or some of those additional pieces of information has been the thing that kind of has kept all of us on pins, trying to make sure that we navigate these funds in the right way. And so once we've come to that place, and as I said to you, to this board about 2 months ago, when we were in the thick of all this, when we first saw those stimulus dollars coming, the initial guidance was that there would be no true guidance on it because of just trying to allow institutions to be able to use some of the funds just to try to stabilize budgets. And unfortunately, with the guidance that was put on the half that went to institutions, that wasn't the case because the guidelines really do not allow you to be able to use it in that regard. We're curious to see what and if there is a next stimulus that would take some of those rails off so that we can use it for just more of a stabilization piece. But we are not counting anything in terms of what of the mystery of what may or may not happen with another stimulus. And so the work that we're trying to get done with the stimulus that we have on campus, we're trying to make sure that we stay within those rails that the Department of Ed has given us.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions on that, we'll move back to class one more forward, please. Thank you. 2021, and the changes that we have made to the general fund revenue budget, as well as expense, you'll see in the next slide, the general fund revenue budget based on our overall state aid increase in loss, if you will, or reduction in total state aid revenue now anticipated. Enrollment, we continue to incorporate a 3% enrollment decline. That has not changed from the original budget work session we had earlier in May. Property tax projection remains at a 4.5% increase. We have had our property tax finalized, formalized, if you will, from the county, and that number is accurate. We are fine with the property tax number. I will also share that we have had another Headley rollback. We're anticipating, we do have an actual number now. Our new millage rate, instead of 1.7606, is now 1.7472. So additional rollback. We are now, based on that, we'll tell you, losing approximately $4 million annually in total property tax revenue compared to the 1.9 originally approved millage rate. So significant annual loss that will become increasingly concerning when, if we move into the next several years, we aren't seeing those large property tax increases. I would anticipate over the next 2 or 3 years, we won't be looking at a 4.5% rate. We will be looking at something significantly smaller. But that, as you know very well, that new millage rate never resets unless it's voted. So we will continue to receive a smaller portion of revenue as that property tax value doesn't grow quite as quickly. We'll continue to keep you updated on that. That millage rate will be updated in the budget packet that you have. And we will, as part of the Monday's meeting, do our required property tax hearing, and you'll see that rate there as well. The state aid number has changed. We specifically talked about that as we continue to look at the revenue losses that the state is projecting. We have increased our estimated state aid reduction from 5%. When we talked to you in May, we were at a 5% loss. We have moved that to a 15% loss. So the state aid revenue in your budget packet is down an additional $1.9 million, or a total decrease from this year, if you will, of $2.8 million. Every 5%, if you'll remember, is about $950,000 of revenue for us. So a 15% loss is about a $2.8 million revenue reduction year over year for us. We don't have any specific indication of what that actual cut will be. We will most certainly have a reduction. I've heard everything from 8% upwards of 25%. If you do the math with what the revenue projections currently are down in the state school aid fund, it's about an 8.9% across the board cut. If you just translate that into total revenue and then spread that across the entire state school aid fund. They will, as I mentioned, it sounds like, have an updated revenue consensus conference in August where they will reset all of those numbers based on more current data. So that could very well change. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to know that until sometime after that revenue consensus conference. So we will be looking at adopting a budget with an estimate in there. And again, right now we're looking at 15%. I am hoping that that is conservative. We have made some other changes in the budget to balance or offset that additional $1.9 million loss so that we can continue to bring you a virtually balanced budget. We have done that primarily in 3 ways. The first 2 are under the other category on this slide. We this year, because our interest income based on the funds that we're holding in some of those mid to long-term investment ranges was increasing fairly significantly. We had allocated some of that interest income to where the actual assets were sitting in plant fund and parking specifically. There is no legal reason that we need to do that, but we felt that was appropriate based on where the assets were sitting. Right now, because of what we're potentially looking at with state aid, we have brought that revenue back into general fund. That represents approximately $600,000 increase, again, as we're trying to mitigate that $1.9 million loss.
Lisa, that 600,000, is that $600,000 in cash, or is that just an accrual that we record?
That $600,000 would be additional actual earned interest income projected based on the investment holdings that we have. So it wouldn't be an unrealized gain. It would be an actual interest income projection.
Okay.
The other thing that we have changed on the revenue side, again, trying to balance that $1.9 million loss, is we have increased our local community stabilization authority payment to an anticipated $1.8 million. That's an increase of $800,000. If you'll remember, this is the money that we're receiving annually. It's now coming to us in two payments, one in the fall and one in mid to late May, related to the loss or the elimination of the personal property tax. So remember, about 4 years ago, personal property tax was phased out. This local stabilization authority has an assessment, primarily some use tax dollars that are going into this authority at the state level. And then the state allocates all of that revenue back out to local taxing jurisdictions, including community colleges. We received, the first time that that happened, we received a much larger payment than we had anticipated. We lost about originally, now that number would have grown clearly, but originally we lost about $750,000. And our payment has consistently been somewhere between 1.8 and 1.9 to $2 million annually that we've received back from this local community stabilization authority. Being very conservative in our budgeting practices, we had left that revenue at $1 million versus the full 1.8 or 1.9. This year was the first full year of their reallocation methodology. So this year being 1920, I was concerned that that payment may vary a bit, and it didn't. We received that again in May, and we've actually received a little over $1.9 million this year in totality. So I am comfortable increasing that budget to 1.8, basing that on a consistent payment stream over at least the last 4 years, including this new methodology allocation. We've left a little room in there, 1.8 to 1.9, but we are booking that entire 1.9 as a revenue into general fund now. Hearing no questions, class, I think we can move to the next slide. The other thing that we have done, again, in order to balance that $1.9 million loss, is we are deferring and have removed from the budget. So you'll see some variance in the salary lines. We are deferring any salary increase for any of our meet and confer employees. That is certainly a difficult decision. And as we take stock of where our revenue is in the fall, both in the state aid and enrollment, we will likely look to revisit this if we can. But for now, we feel it's most prudent to pull that salary increase from the budget. That is a expense reduction with the percentage increase, which originally was at 2.5, and the related FICA and retirement. Remember, those are fairly large percentages. Related to that, we have pulled salary expense and benefit expense specifically down by $515,000.
So as far as the meet and confer, I mean, understand, so the expectation is for the next fiscal year that it will not return. So we're talking about the following fiscal year.
I think your question is whether we would look to provide our meet and confer employees, our administrative and administrative support employees, with any sort of increase for next year being 2021. I think that right now we're pulling it out of the budget. So what you will approve or consider for approval on Monday will not have any salary or merit increase for our meet and confer group.
So I guess my question is, adding on to your statement, with no expectation of it coming back in that same time frame.
And I would perhaps state that a bit differently, that when we get to fall and have a better sense of state aid and enrollment, if state aid comes in better than the 15% loss we're projecting, and our enrollment stays at 3% or potentially comes in better than that, we may look to revisit that decision. If we're able to do something for our meet and confer employees, I think we would certainly bring that back to you, because that would be something you would need to approve. But if we are able to, I think we would like to do something in the 2021 year. But again, that will be very revenue dependent.
And Trustee Brame, I would even say it, the way I would say it is that I would definitely want to revisit that once if those factors around state appropriation as well as enrollment, if those are going to be helpful to us, helpful being better than the conservative estimate that we are making on this budget that we'll present on Monday. If it is close or at that point, I can assure you that I will want to revisit that for our meet and confer employees. Those are folks who do a whole lot of yeoman's work on this campus, and I want to do all I can to support them. And so I feel very confident that I will want, if we can get this thing in a good place. The problem right now is that the mystery of those two factors, and we're not going to know appropriations for quite some time. From what we're being told, we're just not going to know that. But I really want to revisit that for those employees.
Fair enough, and hopefully we can do that. I guess my only comment would be is that when I see the word defer versus remove, actually we're removing it, and with the possibility of getting back to it. So that's maybe a little nuance. All right, thank you.
There are no other general fund expenses to the budget as it was presented to you back in May. So there's nothing else on the expense side of that equation that has changed. We have been able to offset the anticipated additional state aid decline with the interest income change, the personal property tax reimbursement change. The deferral of the meet and confer salary increase. Can you hear me?
We can now. You were muted for some reason for just a couple of seconds.
I keep getting this message that says you're muted by the host.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we do that when we don't like what you're saying.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
No, there was
But I just wanted to clarify, I know that budget packet is vast with many different line items. So I wanted to assure you that there's nothing else on the salary or on the expense side that has changed based on, in addition to, or based on everything that we went through earlier in May. With that, our next steps, which would be outlined on the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, there is a summary here. You'll see that, it was our goal to bring this budget back to you virtually balanced. You'll see a very small surplus of $16,000. Again, looking to balance that. So revenue and expense are equal in essence. Remaining net asset, everything else being equal, would be approximately $19 million. With that, next steps, we will bring you this budget, looking for any additional questions, conversation, and then potentially approval on Monday. We also will have our tax levy in the official hearing that we need to have on Monday as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, because of the significant uncertainty, if you will, and particularly the revenue side of this budget, as well as all that is coming with federal stimulus, the current CARES Act, anything else that might be coming from the federal government, we would anticipate bringing you a full budget amendment in the fall, which is different for us. But because there is so much that potentially could change, we think it's important to keep you and the public, but to keep you updated formally with where this is going to go as we move into the fall. So we can look towards that as well. With that, I would be happy to answer any additional questions. Would be happy if you've got questions on the larger, more detailed line item packet, would be happy to go through that as well. If there's anything that you'd like to review, remember that has all of your funds in it, not just general fund. The narrative was updated based on what I just shared. Would be happy if you've got questions on that or anything else.
Let's start with if there are any detailed questions that anyone has on the information that was sent to us. And then once we've concluded that, then let's make sure that we can summarize what Lisa needs to do between now and Monday's meeting. So let's start with if anybody has any detailed questions at all on any of the information that was given to us.
I have a question about fringe benefits line 2187, the unemployment compensation line. It's significantly increased, and my question is whether, does that relate to unemployment relating to COVID-19? I'm wondering why there's about a $31,000 increase. Because I thought the state law for COVID is that employers would not be paying an increase if their employees were taking unemployment due to COVID.
The unemployment 2187 line looks to me to be 50,000. Is that accurate?
Yes.
So increases from the actual year end of 1819 to the budget, which is both this year and next year. So our budget is traditionally $50,000. The 1819, or our most recently completed fiscal year, we had very few unemployment claims. We are a self-insured, so we pay claims specifically rather than insurance.
Okay.
We have chosen to leave that budget at $50,000, which it has been traditionally held at. That number varies year to year based on our current situation. 1819 just happened to be a very light year. We will have some increased unemployment claims. We are not required to pay the additional, because the additional unemployment was coming from the federal government as part of the federal package. We will pay any normal, if you will, state unemployment, because again, we are a self-paying entity versus paying insurance.
Okay, so got it, self-insured, thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. Anyone else questions on any of the detail? Hearing none, let's.
I think maybe Kenyatta's got a question, but he's
I'm sorry. Kenyatta, you're muted. That's why we didn't hear you.
Someone muted me.
Yeah.
I didn't do it.
If you look at page 1 of the expenses, we see that the contracted services have gone up quite a bit. What's in that number?
Our contracted services, and I'm looking at so you're looking at the summary page. Our contracted services budget at $5,043,000.
Yeah.
Is very consistent with the $5 million budget for this year. Again, our year end at $4.3 million was lighter than that. So the actual is less than the budget.
Yep.
That is a lot of just what it is contracted services. A lot of that is IT related. The large contracts we have for our ERP system, our other type technical computer systems with large payments to Oracle for our enterprise management system.
All right.
Really, there are some contracted services and facilities as well. Snow plowing is an example of that, but a lot of that is IT related.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? I'm looking at each of you, and my sense is we're good there for the detail. Let's go back then and make sure that Lisa understands what we expect from her and her department between now and Monday. For sure, some footnote or some acknowledgement on the CARE funds, how those are being used. It comes to my mind. Were there other things that I'm not thinking about right now that we would like her and her department to tidy up? Anything? All right, okay. So our intention is that this budget product will come to us on Monday, and our hope is that we will approve it on Monday. That's our hope.
Dave, remind me what else is on the agenda. Is this the meeting that takes like a few minutes because we just vote on this?
It's not. Unfortunately, Kenyatta, this is a meeting that's going to rival our longest. We will approve the budget. We will appoint a trustee to fill the unexpired term of Deb. We have 2 monitoring reports that we're going to be looking at. So when we add it all up, dinner reservations at any restaurant that is open should be later rather than earlier on Monday.
Fair enough.
And that agenda will go out, should go out. Misty, I'm looking at you. I'm guessing that the agenda stuff will go out.
I sent it out yesterday.
I was gonna say, I already
It'll
have
come
it.
out
Yeah.
soon, Kenyatta. It'll
Check
come
your
out
email.
sometime
It's
between
there.
yesterday and tomorrow. So, all right. All right.
I
Any
only
other
can look at
comments?
one agenda at a time, and I looked at this one for today.
I know.
I'll catch up. Thank you.
We're all just looking for the link. That's the only thing we're concerned about is where's the link that we got to click on to get on here. And we just breathe a huge sigh of relief when we can find the link. So new link for Monday. By the way, speaking of Monday, we will also be in closed session at 3:30 we gather and Bill will be with us and we will tidy up his contract for which will for the next few years. So that'll be on our closed session agenda. And then we'll open it up for a regular meeting. So unless there are other comments or questions, I will declare this meeting adjourned and we'll see all of you at 3:30 on Monday. With that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.